Edge studio here in Millvale. I'm Matt Geica, your host, and this is Geics Got Game for another Friday morning. Thanks to Brian Crawford for engineering the show. Thank you for listening and watching. Again, we are on Facebook Live. We're on riversedgepgh.com/live. And, of course, broadcasting on the 24/7 stream. We are your home for local music, including the Millvale Music Fest. We are sponsoring that next Saturday, May 13th. Boy, that's going to be something else. So many bands, so many venues right here in Millvale on the banks of the Allegheny, and I hope you can make it down to check it out. And I hope that you continue to check out all of our content here at riversedgepgh.com, including this program, including all of our talk show programming throughout the week. And, of course, as I mentioned, music is our foundation, and you can find live and local music anytime you tune in, basically. That's the beauty of internet radio right here on the program, on the station, I should say. On this program this week, as I'm happy to be back in studio for the first time in 14 days, I want to discuss the bizarro Stanley Cup playoffs. We are in the middle of the second round. Of course, the Penguins are still alive. I'll get to that in just a moment, but it has been a weird year so far, and the one question I have to ask is Corsi dead? One of my favorite advanced statistics. Not terribly advanced, in fact, at all, but in the world of hockey, it qualifies as an advanced statistic, but it's not doing a great job of predicting results this year as opposed to, say, the past decade or so. I'll get more into that a little bit later. Also, I'll ban a cliche, as I always do, and the final number has to do with the UN Pirates. Pirates team that's been up and down, lukewarm for most of the opening 5 weeks of this season, but they do have some really interesting personal stories, some human interest stories that have moved the needle a little bit and have given them some cachet, not just in the sports world, but overall. Some really cool stuff happening there in terms of the international nature of the sport of baseball, and not your typical countries, not your Far East countries, not your Latin America countries, but we're talking Europe and Africa. And if you're following the Pirates at all lately, you probably know what I'm talking about, but we'll close the show with that today. But we're opening the show with Sidney Crosby, of course. And if it feels like we're back in 2011 and 12, well then, I apologize for that, because I feel like there has been no worse time, or there was no worse time, to talk about and discuss and follow Pittsburgh sports than the Sidney Crosby concussion saga. Remember, it took him more than a year, really, to get back to where he was after suffering back-to-back hits to the head in the Winter Classic in 2011 at Heinz Field, and then a game against the Tampa Bay Lightning just days later at then Consol Energy Center. And that's what caused the whole problem, was because Sid was put out on the ice when he shouldn't have been there, when his brain was in a vulnerable state. And I think people forget that when they say that Crosby is concussion prone. Well, yes, he's had a couple of concussions, including one just this past fall at a World Cup of Hockey practice, yet we don't often hear about that one. We always hear about the prolonged recovery. Back in October, he was back on the ice in a matter of 10 to 14 days, and there was no real drama. But I get it. We're in the playoffs, and as opposed to getting hurt in a practice session, as Sid did back in the fall, he is now out indefinitely after his former teammate Matt Niskanen cross-checked him in the face in Game 3 at PPG Paints Arena on Monday night. And it was a brutal scene. I almost felt like they should have called off the game. It was quite the funereal pall that fell over at PPG Paints Arena, and for good reason. It's the best player in the world getting knocked out, almost literally, and lying on the ice looking lifeless for a few seconds. It was scary, scary stuff, about as frightening of a scene as I've seen live, professionally or personally. And I've covered hockey for a while now, better part of a decade. And you see some hard-to-watch scenes, mostly injury-related, sometimes fight-related, and areas where you worry about the welfare of the human beings on the ice. This was certainly that case. Although it wasn't a fight, it was a blow to the head, and it was the Penguins' best player and the best player in the world. And I suppose we can dispute over how malicious the cross-check was, over how avoidable the cross-check was. I think it was very avoidable. I think Matt Niskanen had an opportunity to not defend the side of his net the way that he did. And I think he even admitted that a couple of days later when he said that he could have had his hands down. He could have had one hand on the stick instead of driving the shaft of his stick into the side of Crosby's head. So, you know what? Neither here nor there. I don't think anyone after the fact was convinced of the other's viewpoint. Of course, the NHL's viewpoint is the same as Barry Trotz of the Capitals, that it was in some way a hockey play. And so the 5-minute major that Niskanen got in the first period of Game 3 was sufficient for that. So I'm not telling you anything you don't already know if you've been following the situation. Crosby did skate on Thursday, thanks to the intrepid reporting of Josh Yohe, my colleague at DKPittsburghSports.com. By the way, he was the only Pittsburgh-based reporter in Cranberry when Sid was skating with Carl Hagelin and fellow concussion recovery case Connor Sheary. Yeah, you know, it's funny that that information was out a lot of places, and not too many places credited us for that scoop. But hey, you're used to that on the internet. Everyone steals everything, so maybe I shouldn't be that surprised. But first of all, good job by Josh. That was a hunch that he worked on, that he took to the bank and took to Cranberry at the Lemieux Sports Complex. So Sid back on the ice. I don't know if it's that big of a story in terms of his recovery, though, because over the past several years, as we've learned more and more about concussions, especially since the last time that Sidney Crosby went through anything that was extended at all, light activity is used very early on in the recovery process as opposed to just a complete shutdown. And that's more of a thing that the medical profession is trying. So I don't know how far along Crosby or Connor Sheary are in their recoveries, but I'm sure it was good for both of those gentlemen to get right back to their life's work and feeling like at least they're making some sort of progress. Mike Sullivan has sounded positive the whole time about this. Who knows if that's just him trying to be positive and maybe even trying to convince himself that Crosby and Sheary will be back sooner rather than later. But I've been operating under the premise that he's not going to be back for the rest of this season the rest of the series against the Washington Capitals, which could go a maximum of 5 more days as we sit here on this Friday, May the 6th, or May the 5th, pardon me. Happy Cinco de Mayo, by the way. The series shifts to Washington with the Penguins up 3-1. And again, more on that later in this strange Stanley Cup playoff run. But it's been funny because we are 6 years beyond the Sidney Crosby ordeal, and it's actually amazing how far we have progressed in terms of a sports society. And I'm not just talking about the actual professionals, the medical professionals. I'm discussing fans too here, and the crux of this opening segment from here on out will be about the fans, because I'm sensing an overreaction to the other side of the spectrum. Remember, 6 years ago it was, Sid should get out there. He should just tough it out. The team needs him, et cetera, et cetera. We were still in that time period when concussions weren't taken that seriously. And there was a time in the NHL when Sid probably would have tried to play through that in 2011. And we know now that even though he did at the start of that whole crisis, that protracted recovery period, and it seemed like it went up and down throughout the course of the 12-plus months, because it did. And there was an undiagnosed neck injury involved, too, you might recall, as well. That fact always gets glossed over when you see summaries of the situation. But back then, I think if it were in 2001, if Sidney Crosby were, say, Eric Lindros, another prominent NHL star who had an issue with head injuries, and a repeated issue, probably because he never let himself recover, then Sid would have been back out there in the 2011 season. And who knows if he ever plays hockey again, because it's a physical sport. The way Sid plays, he goes around the net. He was probably going to take another shot to the head at some point. But at least back then he didn't do that. I know there is plenty of room for criticism and how the Penguins and their medical staff handled that. There's been quite a bit of turnover in the Penguins medical staff since then, and they're not going to rush him back. Let's just be clear about that. In fact, there is no rushing back. And I've seen almost a 180 compared to 2011 with how fans are reacting to this. Like I said, back then it was he should tough it out. And now it's, well, maybe Sid should consider retirement. Maybe he should sit it out for several months. Maybe he should just say forget it and come back in the fall. Well, no, they're going to go through the concussion protocol, and if he's recovered, then he's recovered. These injuries do heal if you treat them properly, as we just saw, in fact, 6-7 months ago. And I know that maybe not every Penguins fan or every hockey or sports fan was in tune with that situation, but the Penguins played it by the book there. They did everything right. So did Sidney Crosby, and he was back and had no issues until he ate the stick of Matt Niskanen earlier this week. So it's possible to get it right. We've seen it over and over again in sports. Caution does rule the day these days, so there's no need to concern troll, and that's what I think this is from so many on social media, so many talking out in public, talking to your friends. You've heard it. Sid should take it easy. They shouldn't rush him back. They're not going to rush him back, and there is no concept of rushing someone back in this situation. You go through the process, you take the steps. If he responds, and then he's back on the ice because it's the Stanley Cup playoffs, and the Penguins have a rare opportunity here. And if he doesn't progress, well, then he stays off the ice. It's black and white in this case. I know there is room for gray in this area, in the area of brain health, but not in how concussions are handled. We are very cautious these days, and especially the Penguins, and especially with Sidney Crosby. There is not going to be any gray area here. He's going to complete the steps before he gets back on the ice. So there's no need to say, well, he needs to take it easy. He needs to think about retirement. No, you're wrong. I'm sorry. He doesn't have to think about retirement right now. He just needs to think about recovering from this concussion. Brian, I think you want to chime in here.
I just want to say, Tim says on Facebook that Sid cannot take any more to the head, or much more to the head. Just like a boxer, there's a point where you have to stop and face the possible big physical handicap.
You're wrong, Tim. I'm sorry. You can recover from a concussion, and yes, there is the likelihood that a recovery is longer when you do have more concussions. That happens. 3 or more tends to be the rule of thumb in sports medicine. And I would know. You've seen my brother on this show, so I'm not speaking out of my backside here. This is not something I'm just pulling out of nowhere. So you can recover, and yes, there can be complications, but let's let Sidney Crosby, an adult man, make his decisions. I feel like we're all trying to be his mom or his dad here. We are not in that situation. He's going to make the decision that he thinks is right for him. And to be clear, he can ignore medical advice because he is an adult. He is not a high schooler. Even in college, there's a certain amount of subservience that you have to the medical staff. But Crosby is a professional. And believe me, he understands how to go through something like this. If there has ever been anyone who knows how to go through something like this, then it's him. So let him make the decision. Let's not try to concern ourselves with his personal matters. He's going to come back when he's ready, and the Penguins have plenty of medical precedent now to let him know when they think he is or he isn't. So we've gone so far in the opposite direction now, and you know what it sounds like to me, and this is probably why I'm so passionate about this subject, is because I feel like people aren't trusting the medical pros. And I get it. The Penguins screwed this up the first time around in 2011, but we're 6 years beyond that. There has been so much more research that's come out. We know so much more. And I say we, not necessarily me, but we as a sporting society know so much more about the treatment of brain injuries. And I almost hate calling them concussions because they are brain injuries. They are something to be taken very seriously. And, whether you've seen the movie Concussion or you've watched documentaries or you've read research, you know that this is much more of a known area. And while we're still working through it, there's still plenty of information to get, plenty of precedent to set. They're not going to rush him. And so for me, that sounds like a mistrust in the professionals, in the people that know a lot more than myself and know a lot more than most sports fans out there. So let's take it easy. If you want to talk about what Sid's absence means to the Penguins on the ice, yeah, let's talk about that because it's sports and we all feel like we're experts in a certain way. And there's no harm in speculating on that. We're not distrusting any person who should be trusted in this situation. We're just speculating on sports. So if we can keep the topic to sports here, and then let Sid and the Penguins deal with what they're dealing with. And for me, it's just a waste of breath. It's a waste of time to talk about it any further. But I just had to get that off my chest, get that out of my brain, and out there into the public sphere. I've been tweeting about it. I've been an angry young man this week when I've seen people talk about the fact that Sid should not be rushed back. It's not going to happen. He's going to go through the protocol for the last time, and he is going to follow that procedure. We'll take a break on Gike's Got Game so I can cool down a little bit. When I come back, our featured guest for the week, Zach Weiss, our good friend, just recently reviewed an opera. And yes, it is sports related. It was The Summer King down at the Benedum Center, an opera based on the exploits of former Pittsburgh Negro League great Josh Gibson. It's by Daniel Sonnenberg, and there's still an opportunity to go see the show. Zach Weiss will be joining me to talk about that and perhaps the rise of a new era in Duquesne basketball, an area in which Zach is very passionate about, an area in which he has covered very closely over the past few seasons. This is Gike's Got Game on the River's Edge.
Brian Crawford here to tell you that Millville May Days is the perfect way to discover Millville. May 5th and 6th, you can explore Millville, shop local by touring our business district, and collect seeds for your garden. All participating stops have maps of the tour and a chance to win raffles. If somehow that wasn't enough, we'll have horse-drawn carriage rides Saturday, 12 to 4, and information on joining Millville's sustainability movement available at Gap Park. For more information, follow the Business Association of Millville on Twitter and Facebook at BAM15209.
Rainy Friday here in Pittsburgh, but good to be back in Millville for Gike's Got Game. Segment 2 out of 4 for this hour. I'm Matt Geica, your host. I am a lead analyst and hockey reporter for DKPittsburghSports.com, and we follow the Stanley Cup playoffs throughout, so give us a look. Very inexpensive in terms of subscription, but you get plenty of bang for that buck, or $4 a month to be quite specific if you just want to go on that basis. We also have longer-term plans, and we have plenty for you. Hockey, baseball, football, soccer. We just brought in what we believe to be the city's premier soccer reporter, and John Krasinski. Boy, does this guy know the beautiful game, and he's going to be reporting on the Riverhounds for us throughout this season as they continue on their 5th year at Highmark Stadium down there on the South Shore. And that's, in fact, where our offices are, too. So I think Highmark Stadium is still an underappreciated venue in our city. Get down there and check out some soccer. I advise you to check out some opera this weekend. I've never said that on this program, but The Summer King, an opera about Josh Gibson, the Pittsburgh-based Negro League great from the first half of the 20th century, continues on at the Benedum Center in the Cultural District. We have a show tonight and a show on Sunday before the run comes to an end. And a man who has seen this show and has written a review for Did You See That? That's dystnow.com. He's our friend Zach Weiss, and he joins me to talk about the Summer King and some Duquesne basketball at the back end of the interview as well. But first, Zach, good morning. How are you on this Friday?
I'm well, Matt. How are you?
Terrific. Good to be with you again. And, well, I enjoy your review. You say the Summer King hits a home run, and it's Daniel Sonnenberg you have as your featured photo, the creator of this opera. He's been trying to get this thing off the ground since 2003, so more than a decade. His dream comes to fruition. And how did you think that his vision translated to the stage at the Benedum Center when you were down there?
The way that you look at it is, I think that a lot of people will look at this as just opera being pure opera. And what this opera is, a lot of operas are not, is an opera that's suitable for so many different target audiences, not just the diehard standard opera fan. There's obviously the sports angle with Josh Gibson being what he is in the city of Pittsburgh. I don't need to explain that much of the story. That's pretty well documented, but it's covered from the sports perspective. There's enough history that it keeps the local fan in there. For music enthusiasts, it's a score that's very, very challenging, that has different paces, different genres, every single act essentially has almost a different kind of musical vibe to it, which really is a very tough task, but complements the opera itself very well. And then, of course, you have the opera enthusiasts, where this is a very, very challenging piece. But even more so to just a casual person that maybe this doesn't hit a home run, pun intended, where it's not your necessarily standard play of an opera. The subtitles are up top to follow along. They're entirely in English, so it's easy to follow along. And it's also, in a sense, a double-edged sword, because if a word is flubbed, then you hear the murmurs in the crowd right away, because you hear that the words that maybe aren't said in the lines are right above. So it adds context. It makes it easier to follow along for someone that's not as well versed in opera, myself included. So it's a very, very easy to access piece, but also complex at the same time. And I think that little marriage that gets intertwined during the 2 hours and 15 minutes the opera runs for, including the intermission, make it a very, very successful piece overall.
That's the one thing that I had trouble with. I went to go see the Phantom of the Opera a few years back, and I'm not an incredibly cultured man, so I didn't know the storyline very well. There were no subtitles, so I missed some stuff. Yeah, when lines are sung and you're in a big opera house, then sometimes you can miss things. So I'm actually quite pleased to hear there are subtitles, so you can read along if you're not quite understanding everything that's going on. So, Zach, describe the plot for us, because I think most Pittsburgh sports fans know or should know the story of Josh Gibson, legendary home run hitter and one of the real stars of the Negro Leagues, and played right here in town. Never made it to the majors because the color barrier was still in place. It was still shy of Jackie Robinson breaking that down with the Brooklyn Dodgers. So how much of it is baseball? How much of it is simple human interest in his story off the field?
There's definitely a certain blend to it, a certain mixture. I mean, from the beginning, it starts a little bit on the slow side, where there's two barbers that are talking about the greatest. They were talking about Jackie Robinson, the old schoolish song, "Did You See Jackie Robinson Hit That Ball" plays.
Mm-hmm.
And then you kind of get introduced to Josh Gibson. You kind of see both in the foreground, where they're standing with their back to the audience, and then you see the baseball play out. And how it's played off on stage is very, very interesting, in that you see the pitcher, you see the hitter, which is Josh Gibson, and then you see the catcher. And there's the slow motion where you kind of get a chance to see the pitch being thrown, you see the swing. It's kind of like a boom, 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 almost like a comic strip in how it's presented, where you see everything hopefully well timed, depending on how everything is seen. But everything is rehearsed where it goes through, and then you hear the crack of the bat with the well-versed pitch. You have the radio announcer in the stands also helping you follow along with the action. So that's well presented. There's just that, in that sense, baseball's shown, and there's parallelism with it from the beginning through the end. But there's also a lot of more biographical, how Josh Gibson became a success, the legendary, infamous so-called Yankee Stadium home run. Whether or not it happened, it's still fabled. So, and how they say Yankee Stadium is so grandiose to complement the home run as well as the stadium. Second act is a little bit less baseball, a little bit more so about the decline of Josh Gibson and how he didn't quite reach his goal of making the major leagues, and how, though he did not necessarily make it, he was still successful in his quest, whether he wanted to or not, to break the color barrier with Jackie Robinson's emergence into the major leagues with the Brooklyn Dodgers. So while baseball's shown, it's definitely referenced consistently throughout the opera. So there's enough where baseball and sports fans will definitely get their bang for at least their $12 with the Center King.
Yeah, $12. That's not bad at all. That's better than some movie theaters that you can find around the area. And I mentioned two more shows tonight, this Friday night, and Sunday. You spoke to the composer Daniel Sonnenberg. I'm curious about how he feels about the process to get this thing on the stage, and whether he is satisfied with how it turned out. What's your feel from talking to him for another story on Did You See That?
Dan is someone that I immediately was interested how difficult his responses were, and that they're very complex, they're very detail oriented, and he strikes me as someone that has a lot of detail. He'll take copious notes, and I think that with this project since 2003, where he's trying to find funding, whether it's Portland Ovations, whether it's from American Opera, whether it's from Pittsburgh Opera, trying to get things off the ground, the persistence. it's easy to give up when something doesn't necessarily go your way. And in a sense, it's been a slow burn for Dan, who since 2003, let's do the math, that's 13, 14 years, depending on how the months went, for this opera to really find its audience and quote unquote debut, although the soft open was in 2014 in Portland, Maine at that showcase.
Oh, okay.
But basically, this was Pittsburgh Opera's first world premiere in 78 years in its history.
Wow.
And get it to there was a very, very arduous journey for Dan. It was very, very trying. And he actually has 3 kids, and a lot of them are based on name. One of them is Satchel, which that need I say more. So
Says it
he
all.
loves the game of baseball, and he's had a fascination with Josh Gibson for the longest time. And to see it pay off on the stage and the curtain call on opening night this past Saturday night, where he's clapping and he's pointing to the heavens, it's been a very, very emotional journey for him. And to see it play out in front of an almost entirely sold-out Benetton Center crowd was emotional to watch. Really, as a reviewer, you're trying not to have any emotion. I resisted applause. I did everything I could. And when I saw him break down, it was very, very hard not to kind of be there with him. You have dignitaries, you have everyone from Pittsburgh Opera, you have all the season ticket holder patrons, you have Bob Nutting was there. There's so many different individuals, and they're all essentially on their feet, standing ovation right away. And then Dan came out, and pretty much everybody was ready to melt. So they were right there with Dan on the journey, and Dan's in town again with his 3 kids coming for these last 2 shows, and it's been a very, very emotional journey for him, and to see it play out and all these years of trying to make this work and to have it work, I can only imagine how he feels. But between this and Detroit next year, I'm sure that he's very, very happy with how things are going, and he very well might have a hit on his hands.
Yeah, I like the idea that it's moving on to Detroit, another city that has a great Negro League tradition with the Detroit Stars, of course. So add another stat to Josh Gibson's Baseball Hall of Fame credentials: a .359 batting average, 962 home runs, and 1 opera now made about him, a biographical piece by Daniel Sonnenberg. You can see the show, as I mentioned, this weekend, yet 2 more presentations of it. And Zach Weiss has 3 stories on it on DYST Now. That's short for Did You See That? So that's where Zach was covering that for us. Zach also covers Duquesne sports for a variety of entities, and he has over the years. I just have one question for you about Keith Dambrot, Zach, and his joining Duquesne from Akron. It seems like a real coup for the Dukes and their athletic program and their athletic director, and really a boost for an athletic program that needs it right now. How big of an impact do you see the newcomer, Keith, offering the Duquesne program in his first year?
I think it all goes back to one word, and that's loyalty. It's well documented, the loyalty that Keith Dambrot has to the university. It's behind Akron at the time. It was his favorite university because of the alumni history that goes with it. And Duquesne fans have been waiting for some hope, and Jim Ferry, unfortunately for him, came and ultimately went, and fan attention, fan enthusiasm was tempered just a little bit. Whether or not it was right for him to get fired or not is up for interpretation, but this hire has really, really rejuvenated a lot of the Duquesne fan base. From some of the season ticket holder department people, I hear very, very good things, that people are starting to come back, and the fact that Duquesne, in a sense, has one of their own is very, very good. Loyalty is playing out in the sense that his whole assistant coaching staff, the rest of his coaching staff, came over from Akron. There's a couple players from Akron that transferred over. Recruiting is coming back. Duquesne's a Nike school. The best basketball teams partnered with LeBron James, which he has close ties with Keith Dambrot, and that he was LeBron's high school coach for the first couple of years. So LeBron gives back to Keith Dambrot as much as he possibly can, and Duquesne's going to have that. They're going to be wearing LeBron James Nike apparel. LeBron may come down, you never know, and just murmurs of LeBron coming down at Duquesne, which hasn't had much in the way of success in men's basketball recently, is just some fresh life in the program. Everybody says the big deal is LeBron. In a sense, it's a little tired, but in a sense, it also brings energy back to a Duquesne fan base that desperately needs it and desperately wants a winner, and has some patience and has supported this team through thick and thin, through athletic administration, through coaching changes. And I think the main idea is that they feel that this very well may be the guy. This is somebody that's committed to winning at Duquesne, is committed to finding success at Duquesne, has built some exciting transfers that'll play in a couple years at Duquesne, and it all goes back to that word, that big loyalty word. And Keith Dambrot's as loyal as it's going to come to Duquesne. This was a home run hire. I hate to keep using the word home run in this interview, but
How about slam dunk? We'll go with that since it's basketball.
An alley-oop.
Yeah.
Between Dave Harper and Keith Dambrot, you can determine who's passing and who's completing the dunk. But be that as it is, that press conference, Keith Dambrot nailed it, hit it out of the park. That's not quite a home run, so I think I'm safe in that regard. But it was a successful press conference, and his answers, he seemed prepared for everything. They were well-versed. They were appealing to the fans, and winning the press conference was step one, but what he's done since then and the approaches on and off the basketball court that he's taken, this first year might be a little tough, but in a year beyond that, maybe 2 or 3, this could be a legitimate Duquesne team that's on the top half of the Atlantic 10.
Well, normally I would chuckle at the thought of winning a press conference, but Duquesne really needed some good PR after that coaching search and everything. So that was significant. That was important. And now he gets about the business of actually building a basketball program. So I think it went about as well as you could expect for Duquesne, especially since it wasn't looking too great a couple of weeks into that coaching search after firing Jim Ferry. Zach, thank you for your input and your insight on both the opera, which is a new thing, and Duquesne basketball, which is a routine thing for you. Thanks again, and we'll talk to you soon. Have a great weekend.
All right, you too, and just a thanks to everybody that helped me make the opera story reality, and of course, thank you, Matt, for the time.
Yeah, you got it, man. That's Zach Weiss. I'm Matt Geica. I shall return for segment 3. We're killing a cliche on Geics Got Game.
Hey folks, it's Mike Sasson of The Mike Sasson Show. Me and Alex, my producer extraordinaire, looked at the landscape of internet radio and figured if we want to make it, we've got to work. At least an hour earlier. Now on at 9 a.m. every Tuesday on the River's Edge, a new kind of radio.
Welcome back. Yes, that is Mark Sasson, one of our many talents here at the River's Edge, found at riversedgepgh.com. You can find me on Facebook and Twitter, by the way. I always neglect to mention that. Got to get the important social media plug in. Matt Geica is the handle. I keep it simple because my name is rather unique. No need to dress it up or anything like that. Believe it or not, it's the only Matt Geica on Twitter, so don't have to add a 1 or an underscore or anything like that. So I guess I have that going for me, which is nice. What's also nice is to be with you here in studio on this Friday morning, about 15 minutes to go in this week's program. Thanks again to Zach Weiss for joining me to talk some opera. I have an itchy nose this morning. If you're watching on the Facebook feed, I don't know what's going on, but it is allergy season. Occasionally it crops up. Anyway, hockey talk. And it was more Sidney Crosby concussion talk, which I'd rather avoid at all costs, but I felt I needed to get that off my chest in the first segment. But let's talk about the Stanley Cup playoffs at large. The last time I spoke with you, we were in the middle of the Penguins Blue Jackets first round series. Penguins eventually took care of Columbus 4-1, and they are on the verge of doing the same thing to the President's Trophy winners Washington Capitals. And for the second straight year, the Penguins are poised to knock off Washington after the Caps had the regular season's best record. So that in and of itself is impressive. But what's also impressive, and this gets into our Ban the Cliche segment, is how the Penguins are defying modern conventional wisdom on how to win in the postseason. And the cliche is puck possession is king, or just in general, puck possession. That is a buzzword, a buzz phrase among hockey commentators, coaches, players. Everyone's in on the secret these days. I think back when the Red Wings were winning in the late portion of the past decade, it was still kind of new and controversial in some circles. Ooh, puck possession. They hold on to the puck. They keep it. And so that's how they win. That's how they defend, by not defending. And in that way, it makes a lot of sense. And you heard a lot about that when Dan Bilesma took over, too, in 2009 as well and led the Penguins to the Stanley Cup. We want to play in their end more than we want to play in our end. And at that time, believe it or not, that was quite the stance to take. I think there was still the idea that you wanted to be a good in-zone defensive team first and foremost. But as it turns out, when you have the puck, the other team can't score. And so it makes a lot of sense in that way. But at that time, that was sort of a revelation for a lot of hockey fans, if not the people who are actually in the sport. But after a decade plus of having shot attempt data at our disposal, and shot attempts are meant to measure productive possession. Yes, there is possession time, and they count possession time in American football. But in hockey, we've been counting possession and been measuring it by how many shot attempts your team gets at goal compared to how many that you allow. So it's not literally possession, but it is, as I mentioned, what type of production you're getting when you have the puck. And those Red Wings teams I'm talking about, the teams that the Penguins ran into in back-to-back Cup finals, they were dominant at that. And I think at that time, they were able to stockpile players who were good at that skill in order to build a team like that. Now, as I said, the secret's out. Everyone wants a player who holds on to the puck for the most part. Maybe one or two teams don't feel quite as passionate about it as most do. But the Penguins were a great example of that last year. After Mike Sullivan took command from Mike Johnston, they became a puck possession dynamo. And they were generating not just the majority of the shot attempts, but also the majority of the scoring chances. And they rode that all the way to the Cup. In fact, you could argue they weren't as dominant on the scoreboard last postseason as they could have been because they had so many great chances and they weren't a great finishing team. This year, they're the opposite. I think that they have the best shooting percentage in the NHL playoffs to this point as they lead the Capitals 3 games to 1 on this Friday morning going into Saturday's Game 5. But 10-plus years of data says the team that has the best shot attempt ratio, we call that Corsi for short, after the former Buffalo Sabres goaltending coach who used shot attempts as a way of measuring the workload of his goaltenders. So now it's kind of ironic that we use it as an offensive stat primarily, but it all works in the same way. Tip of the cap to Jim Corsi, tap of the stick for your pioneering there. And we call these advanced stats, but they're not terribly advanced. We're essentially counting and dividing. It's really just a ratio. But over the years, the team with the better Corsi rating has won a playoff series the majority of the time, 60, 70, sometimes even 80%, depending on the playoff year. Well, I'm about to read to you the top teams in terms of Corsi in this playoff year. Number 1, Minnesota Wild, 60.8% out in the first round in 5 games. Number 2, the Washington Capitals, 56.5% on the verge of elimination in the second round after winning the President's Trophy. Number 3, the Columbus Blue Jackets, 53.7% out in the first round in 5 games. Number 4, Montreal Canadiens, 52.6% Corsi rating out in the first round in 6 games to the New York Rangers. Finally, we get to the 5th team, the Anaheim Ducks, 52.1%, and they are tied 2-2 in their best-of-7 second-round series against the Edmonton Oilers. So we get down to 5, and even that team is still 2 games from elimination and not in any way in the driver's seat, unless you consider having 2 of the final 3 games in that series potentially at home as in the driver's seat. So we can leave that up for interpretation. Number 6, Ottawa, 51.6%. Ottawa tied 2-2 in their series against the Rangers after losing back-to-back games in New York. Calgary, the 7th best Corsi team, 51% out in the first round in 4 games. They were swept by the Ducks. Finally, we get down to Nashville, the 8th place team in Corsi in this playoff, just barely over the break-even point at 50.8%, and they are up 3 games to 1 in their best-of-7 series. So we have one likely conference final team in the Nashville Predators, America's team, of course, since I picked them to win the Stanley Cup over the Penguins. The Preds are the one team in the top half of the playoff field this year in puck possession, in shot attempt ratio, in Corsi, whatever you want to call it. that are on the verge of making the Final Four. It's crazy. It's a bizarro NHL postseason. I don't know how to explain it. I do know that one playoff year doesn't disprove anything, but I've always appreciated the perspective of one James Myrtle, now of the Athletic Toronto, another pay site like ours at DK Pittsburgh Sports. Trying to change the paradigm of sports coverage and how the business is run. But that's neither here nor there. James has been at the forefront of using data in hockey. He used to do it way back in the day when he was on Blogspot with his site From the Rink. Then he went on to work for the Toronto Globe and Mail, and now, as I mentioned, off on a different venture. But he has always said that we shouldn't be too, I guess, eager to make puck possession the be-all and end-all, because while it has worked in this era, it's possible that just this style of play in this era of NHL hockey is more conducive to puck possession. And a lot of times I think back to the late 90s Penguins, a team that I grew up following. They would always lose the shot battle. They would always have 19, 21, 24 shots while the opposition had 30, 35. But they would always seem to have, or not always, but they would typically seem to have the better scoring chances. And I thought those teams back in that day, very European influenced, they didn't take shots when they didn't have to. So that would necessarily knock down their puck possession rating as we measure it today. And you had the teams of Jágr and Straka and Kovalev, and you go on the defense, Yuri Slager, kind of an offensively minded guy, German Titov. The list goes on of players who would hang on to the puck instead of shoot it. Jan Hrdina, centerman. Heck, Mario Lemieux, when he came back, he wasn't just a pump-it-on-net kind of guy. He was a guy who looked for the best possible scoring chance. So maybe it's just in this era that puck possession and winning the shot battle has been relevant, has been the most relevant stat, the most repeatable stat. Maybe we're transitioning into a different era. We see the Penguins counterattacking this postseason. More by necessity because they don't have Chris Letang, and now they don't have Sidney Crosby, so they've had to, in a lot of ways, play the rope-a-dope in order to succeed and in order to get the job done against teams that are forechecking them heavily. I am curious to see if they play a team, say in the third round like Ottawa, who likes to sit back, if that counterattack thing works, and if the Penguins end up winning the puck possession battle if they get that far. Heck, we saw the Capitals back off in Game 4 at PPG Paints Arena. Maybe that changes the calculus, that changes the math in this series. But it's been really crazy to see all these teams who are losing the puck possession battle. And yes, I realize teams that lead games tend to absorb more pressure. Just that's human nature. That's what happens. The team that trails tends to press harder. So a lot of times that can flip the script at the end of a game. But the numbers don't lie here. Over the larger sample, unadjusted shot attempts, the teams that have had more of them are losing in this playoff. And I'm still trying to figure out why. I think a lot of people in the game of hockey are trying to figure out why right now. Time for our final break. When I come back, it's the final number. And I'll just give it away. The number is 2 for the United Nations Pirates. And I'll explain more when I return to wrap up the show. This is Geiks Got Game, and this is the River's Edge.
Hey, listen up for some sweet pizza discounts. The River's Edge is partnering with Frank's Pizza and Chicken to offer you 10% off your ZA. That's short for pizza.
Seriously? ZA?
What?
Anyway, mention you heard this ad and Frank's will give you 10% off your order of $15 or more.
Oh my god, have you tried their famous buffalo chicken pizza?
Oh, don't even get me started. Can you name all 4 Frank's locations?
Millville, obviously. Troy Hill, Shaler, and North Hills.
Gold star. Anyway, support the River's Edge Radio Network by ordering from Frank's Pizza and Chicken the next time you get hungry for some ZA. And don't forget to mention you heard this ad so you get your 10% off. Go to frankspizzachicken.com for more info.
Offer good for a limited time. Order must be $15 or more before taxes. Cannot be combined with other discounts or offers. Other legal jargon and whatnot.
And we're back. Final segment, Geiks Got Game. We'll put a bow on it for you. Thanks again to Brian Crawford for engineering the show. And he has done quite a bit of work, along with the rest of the River's Edge administration, in putting together the Millvale Music Fest. That's next Saturday, all day. I'm looking at the schedule right now on the wall. It's massive. Many venues, many bands, many sponsors. So great job, Brian. And yeah, we look forward to seeing how that all turns out. I'm sure you are as well. Anyway, I'm going to cheat here in the last segment. I said I had one final number, and it was 2. Now I have 2 final numbers. The first one is 11. as a hockey tradition continues on with the Penguins calling up their Black Aces. That's minor league players whose season has ended, or junior players in the case of one of these gentlemen. But they're called up and they're eligible to play for the Penguins in the postseason, although most times they're practice guys and they hang out, they get some experience, and they're there just in case. But at any rate, here are the 11 players called up from the AHL, Wilkes-Barre Scranton Penguins, as their season is over with. So sorry to hear that, but they'll be up with the Penguins. Goalie Sean McGuire, defenseman David Warsofsky, Derek Pouliot, Cameron Gauntz, and Frank Corrado. You'll remember Corrado was acquired in the Eric Fair trade with the Maple Leafs at the deadline. Also forwards Tom Sestito. We've seen him a few times in the major leagues, if you will, usually for muscle purposes. Dominic Simon of the Czech Republic. He's also played a few games. John Sebastian D., who made his NHL debut in the final game of the regular season at New York. Garrett Wilson, and former Hobey Baker winner, Michigan man Kevin Porter, who played quite a bit for the Penguins last year. In fact, almost met the standard for inclusion on the Stanley Cup last season. I believe he played in 40 games, and you have to play in 41 to be automatically on the Cup. And that was 10. 11 is Daniel Sprong from the junior hockey world from Charlottetown of the Quebec Major Junior Hockey League. Daniel Sprong, second-round pick of a couple of years ago. Many fans are saying we want to see Daniel Sprong in the lineup with Crosby and Sheary out. I still don't feel like the coaching staff wants to put him in to the Stanley Cup playoffs after going almost 2 years without being in an NHL game and after playing in the very, let's put it this way, very defensively loose Quebec Major Junior Hockey League. It's pretty easy to score in that league. No disrespect to the numbers that Daniel Sprong put up, but the structure isn't quite the same and the intensity isn't quite the same as the Cup playoffs. So I think we'll have to wait until the fall to see Sprong on the ice in a game that counts. But those are your Black Aces. And as for the real final number 2, let's talk about the United Nations Pirates. The internationalization, if I can make up a word, of the game of baseball continues on. We saw the World Baseball Classic 2 months ago, and now we see the Pirates set precedent for 2 nations. They have become the first team to employ a player from the continent of Africa, let alone the country of South Africa, in Gifton Gope, the charismatic and very skilled defensive shortstop. And in fact, he's hitting a little bit too for the Pirates since his call-up last week. So he makes history for the entire continent. Think about that. The first player born and raised in Africa to make his major league debut. Congrats to Gift, a gem of a human being. And also congratulations to the first Lithuanian-trained player to make the majors, Dovydas Neverauskas. Sounds like a hockey name. He'd fit right in with Darius Kasparaitis from Penguins past, but he's a baseball player. He's a right-handed pitcher, and he also made an appearance or two in the majors a couple of weeks ago for the Pirates. I expect we'll see him again, even though he is back down with AAA Indianapolis. Dovydas Neverauskas, while not the first Lithuanian-born player to ever make the majors, there was a player early in the 20th century, Joe Zapusta, I believe his name was, but he was raised in America, even though he was born in Lithuania. This is the first Lithuanian-born and trained player to make the majors. So the Pirates, who also made waves when they signed 2 players from India, you'll remember, in Dinesh Patel, a right-handed pitcher, and Rinku Singh, a left-handed pitcher. Both of them didn't pan out for various reasons. Patel, ineffectiveness. Singh, repeated arm injuries. But the Pirates did that to try to get a foothold in some non-traditional markets, to try to find a new market inefficiency, as they always have to do with the way they do business and with the way baseball is financially. So just if you like a good story, you have to like Gifton Gope and Dovydas Neverauskas. And I'm really intrigued by Gift's offensive work early in the major leagues. Yes, the league will push back on him, but he's never been much of a hitter at any level in the minor leagues. So I was skeptical of his ability to stick in the majors for any long-term stretch, even though he is a wizard. He truly is a gift on the defensive side of the ball. So at the very least, I don't know how the hitting is going to turn out, but you'll love watching Gifton Gope play some defense, and I'm sure you already have if you're a Pirates fan. We'll get to more baseball in the next episode of Geiks Got Game. Hockey heavy opera heavy, in fact. Oh, yeah, we got our baseball in with the Summer King. Thanks to Zach Weiss for joining us to talk about that and Duquesne basketball. Hope you enjoyed the program. Again, this purports to be non-traditional sports radio, so I like to touch on some subjects you may not hear in other places. Hope I continue to do that for you. Until next time, this is Matt Geiger reminding you that when the radio fades, you know life's moving fast. God bless and have an awesome weekend. We'll see if the Penguins move on to the conference final. They need one win in their final 3 games against the Capitals to pull that off. We'll find out together, won't we? Thanks for listening to Geik Scott Game on the River's Edge.